It's a compelling mystery. I still have seen nothing at all to explain what happened to her. It's still as if she's vanished into thin air.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of Crime Suspect, a brand new show where each week we'll be unravelling some of the UK's most prolific crimes, as well as providing in-depth analysis on the criminality that plagues our nation. On the show today, the hunt for Madeleine McCann. We dissect the latest updates from one of the most famous cases of missing children that has fascinated the world. Later, is it safe on your street? I'll be taking you, virtually, to Liverpool for this week's postcode watch. And finally, it's your chance to book a crook as we show you this week's wanted criminals. Joining me for all of this today are barrister Oliver Doherty, retired Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chaudhri, and Sky News esteemed crime correspondent Martin Brunt. Thank you all very much for being here. Now, you have the right to remain watching. This is Crime Suspect. So, it's been 16 years since Madeleine McCann disappeared on May the 3rd in 2007, while on holiday with her family in Praia de Luz, a resort town in Portugal. The McCann family had been staying in a rented apartment with their 3 children when Madeleine went missing while her parents were dining at a nearby restaurant. The case quickly garnered international media attention and a massive search effort was launched. But despite numerous lines of inquiries and reported sightings, Madeleine was not found, and the case remains unsolved to this day. Martin, what is it about this missing person case that has us all so fascinated by it?
I think it can be summed up in one word: mystery. The German prosecutor says that he has lots of compelling evidence that points to his suspect, but we don't know what that evidence is. He won't reveal it, understandably. I've not seen anything over all these years that gives me any real idea, anything corroborated that gives me a clue as to what happened to Madeleine McCann, not even how she got out of the apartment where she was sleeping before she vanished. It's a compelling mystery, and it's reached such global parts, such big parts of the world, that there are people all over the world who know of this story, and I think, like me, share a real desire to find out the answer.
It's a very ordinary story that turns extraordinary very, very quickly, isn't it? Is that part of the fascination?
Yeah, I think why people were initially so fascinated is that Madeleine vanished in a scenario that's familiar to millions of us. She was in a holiday apartment in southern Europe, the sort of holiday that many of us take regularly. And it's in a situation where we rather take our eyes off our children. You know, the weather's better. It's a more relaxed atmosphere because it's a holiday situation. We don't keep quite the same eye on our kids as we do when we're back home. I mean, that's the reason that we take children on holiday. But of course, you know, almost all of us come back as a complete family from those holidays. The McCanns didn't.
Martin mentions the British police, and of course the Metropolitan Police have played a part in this, because after pressure was brought upon the Prime Minister, David Cameron, all those years ago, funding was found and the Met started a review. They then launched their own investigation.
Yeah, well, the Metropolitan Police decided on the instructions of the then Home Secretary and David Cameron to initiate that review. A review is very different to an investigation. In terms of a review, they would look at all the available information, any information or evidence that is provided to them, generally in documentation form. And then they'll look at what's gone well in that investigation, what hasn't gone so well, what are the opportunities, what are the missed opportunities, what are the threats to that particular investigation. And at the conclusion of that, they will come out with a list of recommendations. Very, very different to an actual investigation. 29 police officers actually were put onto that investigation team, subsequently reduced at a later stage. But they would then look at that review, but they'd also come up with their own lines of inquiry.
So that size of team is the same that would be applied to a murder, for example, if one happened in London or any part of the UK. That's how big that team was.
That's exactly that, Peter. When you think about the fact that this was a missing persons investigation in Portugal, you've got a significant number of police officers, some who will be travelling there and back, because all the inquiries and investigation would have taken place in Portugal with very little going on here.
Martin, you know the Portuguese police, or certain officers, fairly well. You've spoken to them a lot over the years. Do you think the Portuguese police gave the Metropolitan Police everything they had?
I can't believe that the Portuguese police would have held back stuff from Scotland Yard or the Germans. And of course, the Portuguese police still act as the agents for the Germans who are overseeing this investigation and carrying out requests, searches, interviews and so forth. Everything that the Portuguese police did during their initial investigation, which lasted, 15 months, was put online with some redactions. It was a bizarre situation. They hardly said anything publicly, yet at the end of the investigation, almost everything was put on the internet.
What do you think the major errors were that the Portuguese police made in the early stages of the inquiry?
There's been a lot said, huge criticism of the way the Portuguese police went about it, and I think they accept that they did not seal off the scene immediately. They did it pretty quickly, but there were 2 or 3 hours where the first uniformed officers turned up, thought they were looking for a child who had wandered off and didn't treat it initially as a potential crime. So evidence was lost, evidence was destroyed, trodden on. The review that led to Scotland Yard's investigation so many years on identified some major failings of the Portuguese police investigation, including the capture of mobile telephone data, the searches of surrounding properties, the interrogation of and finding of everybody who worked at the holiday complex and who were living in all those holiday flats around the area. A lot of those searches and interviews were done very haphazardly, and Scotland Yard, so many years on, had to go back and redo an awful lot of that work that wasn't done at the time.
Shabnam, the investigation may have been fatally damaged by all the errors that Martin talks about. But setting those aside for a moment, if we may, there is still a sort of working hypothesis, isn't there, as to what happened to Madeleine? Do the Met have their own thoughts and ideas on it? And do the Portuguese police have any firm ideas on it? And have they made those public?
Yes, I think consistently throughout for the last 23 years, I think the initial thoughts by the Portuguese police was that an international paedophile ring had taken Madeleine, or that some team for adoption had taken her. But the working hypothesis was that a suspect was identified, and that because he had a number of previous convictions for child sexual abuse, for burglaries, for breaking into apartments and so on, that the likelihood is that this particular suspect may well have been involved in that particular investigation.
Which brings me to you, Oliver, and thank you very much for your patience while listening to everything that my other guests have had to say. This man, of course, this suspect, goes by the name of Bruckner. And there is a German prosecutor called Mr. Wolters who's been very bullish about Mr. Bruckner. And he said words to the effect of, and these are my words, "We've got him, but we just can't prove it." Very unusual.
I think that's highly unusual, and I think it's extremely troubling. If you have a situation where you have a prosecutor or a prosecution team who are effectively saying, we've got our man, but now we just need to prove it. That sets alarm bells ringing in my head. We are dealing with the loss of a child. We are dealing with parents who don't know what happened to their daughter. In amongst all of the intense speculation about this case over the years, we all must hope for the same thing, that at some point in the future, the mystery is solved and somebody, any wrongdoer, is brought to justice. Now, that is going to require anybody involved in the investigation and then the prosecution to deal with the case fairly. I think there are, or not I think, I know that over history there are examples of cases where the police or investigators, because they are so focused on one individual and they choose their individual and then they build the case towards that individual, that is when mistakes happen.
I have an expression for that.
Yeah.
I say, and this is when the police get themselves into such hot water over the years and lock up innocent people, let's not forget that. It's when they look for proof, not truth.
Yes.
And I think any investigation, and I'm sure Shabnam will bear me out, should be a relentless search for the truth, not facts that fit a theory. Let me set a fictional set of circumstances for you. Mr. Smith has been arrested and charged with kidnapping and murdering a child. Somebody from the Crown Prosecution Service has said words to the effect of, and you know what's coming here now, we've got our man, we just can't prove it. Some months later, they put him on trial. Mr. Smith is your client. You are representing him at the Old Bailey. Mr. Smith is in the dock. How are you going to deal with those very unwise fictional comments made by that person from the CPS?
Well, first thing to say is I hope nobody in the Crown Prosecution Service would be as unwise as to say anything like that. But let's take your example, but move it on. Let's imagine a situation that case has intense media attention and speculation. I think the phrase that was used in a case that went all the way to the Court of Appeal, which everyone will remember, was a barrage of media attention, and that was the case of Abu Hamza. You will remember the radical cleric who had an awful lot of attention in the media upon him, such that when he had a trial at the Old Bailey and was convicted, he appealed on the basis that he shouldn't have been tried because he couldn't have a fair trial because of all the comments about him made in advance of his trial. So to answer your question, what would you do? Well, you would argue that comments like that made before a case has gone before a judge or a jury and been dealt with in a formal process, you would argue that that prevents the defendant from having a fair trial. Whether or not that argument is successful is a different matter. It wasn't in Abu Hamza's case, but it was certainly an argument that you would make.
Martin, what do you think is going to happen next?
We don't even know whether the German prosecutors are going to charge Christian Bruckner. I speak regularly to Hans Christian Wolters, who's really the spokesman. He's not the main prosecutor. So he speaks on behalf of the prosecutors, and he's been telling me for 2 years that, well, in a few months we might be in a position to charge our suspect. But that goes on and on and on. And the last time I spoke to him, he doesn't envisage a charge this year. So you begin to think, if he's so adamant that he's got this strong evidence against his suspect, why hasn't he charged him yet? And the conclusion to most people is, well, maybe he's bluffing. He can't have the evidence he says he has because he hasn't charged him.
Could he be saying this to try and tempt people to come forward that know something?
Well, the problem with tempting people to come forward is that they're not tempted to come forward for any other potential suspects or other leads that might lead to a suspect. The job of the police is to prove or disprove the involvement of somebody's in a crime, and they don't appear to have done that on this case. They have said that they're certainly not going to charge this man this year because they don't have the evidence. And whilst they're focused completely on him, they're not looking at other potential suspects.
My last question to you, Shabnam, as a former senior detective. In your opinion, do you think Madeleine will ever be found, either dead or alive?
No, the only way that Madeleine is going to be found is either if somebody confesses to the crime, to having abducted her, or if significant new information comes to light which gives an exact location of where she will be. And that needs to come from either the public or the perpetrator of that crime.
Shabnam, Martin, Oliver, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, moving on to this week's Postcode Watch, where we're looking at the criminality on the streets of Liverpool. Violent crime here makes up 38.3% of all offences reported in this postcode area. Violence and sexual offences are the most common crimes, totalling 28,776, with 8% of crimes being either criminal damage or arson. And if you live in Albert Dock or Queenstock, then look away now, because it's the most dangerous neighbourhood in Liverpool, followed by Central and Islington in second place, and Pierhead as the third most dangerous area. Liverpool's safest neighbourhoods are Calderstones, Childwall East and West Allerton. Gangs are also rife in Liverpool. The drugs and illegal firearms trade in Britain is almost exclusively run by a cartel of Liverpudlian traffickers. The East Side Boys, the Whitney Gang, the Crocker Crew, the Delhi Mob, Wave 0420, the Nogger Boys are just a few of the criminal gangs flooding the region with corruption. Now, of course, we all need to keep ourselves safe from these kind of gangs. And if you want some advice, don't join them. That's a very good way to keep yourself safe. Shabnam, gangs. Plenty of them in London.
Plenty of them in London, Peter.
What are the police doing to tackle them?
Well, most police boroughs have gangs units. They work very closely with partners. The local authorities will be the educational authorities, will be probation offices, will be youth services. They will work with charitable organisations to ensure that young people in particular have a redirection out of that kind of criminality, so that they keep them off the streets and that they're not involved in gangs. But as you know, Peter, there's been huge cutbacks in terms of financial opportunities for all agencies, police, partners, which has then decimated opportunities for young people to actually get out and about. And now that's why you've got more increase in gangs and more increase in criminality.
Thank you. Right, now for the part of the show where we bring you the mugs of thugs who are terrorising our streets. Have you seen these criminals? First up is this suspect, wanted in connection with robbing a 12-year-old girl at knife point in Camden, London. Two males approached the victim on Hampstead Road as she was walking home. One of them threatened her with a knife and told her to hand over her phone and give him the password. Once she had provided the password, the suspects let her go and she ran away. Next, we have Michael Seddon. He's described as 5'9" tall, of slim build, with blue eyes, short brown hair, and he could be sporting a beard. He also has a scar to the left of his mouth and a scar on his right elbow. Seddon is wanted in connection with a breach of conditions following his release from prison after serving a sentence for robbery. Lastly, we have 21-year-old Andrew Hanrahan, known to his friends as Andy, who is wanted in connection with a domestic incident. Hanrahan, from Barker Road, Chertsey, is described as being around 5'5" tall, with olive skin and brown hair. He has a tattoo saying baby or baby face on his arm. If you know or have seen any of these crooks, get in touch anonymously with Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111. Right, that's all we've got time for this week. Many thanks to Oliver, Shabnam and Martin. Be sure to leave us a comment, like and subscribe, and we'll be back next week for more Crime Suspect.